So the recording is already on. I tend to forget that sometimes, so I did it in advance. Welcome to SQL Friday number 121. Today we have Rob Sewell, and I think it's the first time Rob is on SQL Friday. And I usually try to remember when I met speakers I met in person. When was the first time? I think first time I met you was SQL Saturday in Cork.
Yes, that would make sense.
You had a demo about containers. I think the session was brilliant. You didn't think it was brilliant because none of your demos worked. But I mean, it was a lesson in troubleshooting rather than anything else. And that's funny too. Rob is going to talk about the new SQL CMD, which I think most people didn't use or even didn't hear much about, because it's been flying under the radar for a bit, but it's cool stuff. And Rob will tell you all about why you should use it. So with that said, introduction of yourself, I guess you do it much better than I. So the stage is going now.
So what I said to Magnus earlier was that I am currently practicing my high availability for my office solution, in that we're running off my phone because I've got no internet. But this is in my new office, which you can see here. This is the first time that I've been able to work or do presentation without internet. Normally, I would have had to be getting in my car and driving off somewhere to find a place to go. Because, of course, I live next door to my dad, so sometimes I'll go in there if my wife needs the office. But his internet is out as well. So, ta-da. So we're going to use SQL CMD. If you have any questions, just interrupt me. I am not proud. Just throw them in a chat or just shout out, and then we can all learn the things that we need to learn. So you get to enjoy my data mosh pit slides. And first, me. So the most important thing about me is that you can see that there are some contact details on there. They are the ones that you should use to get in touch with me. One of those two pictures is me wearing makeup. I won't tell you which one it is. I am an MVP because Microsoft think that I talk too much about their stuff, and I'm very grateful to get that award. I love it because it gets me into different countries, so I can speak about things that I love, technology in many ways. When I'm not doing that, I am basically helping organizations to automate their infrastructure, generally sort of data platform adjacent. But as you know, nowadays we can go all the way out from data platform into all sorts of things. And I am an organizer of the PowerShell Conference Europe, which will be happening next year in I can't actually tell you. It will be happening next year. And if you look out on the internet and the socials, we will find out very soon. Oh, that nearly got me in a lot of trouble. But I'm also an organizer of SQL Bits, which I can tell you when that's happening, because that is happening next year. Tickets are released in a week's time, under a week's time now. So this is all here. SQLbits.com. Come and have a look. If you're interested in speaking, we still have another 10 days of time for you to submit. And it will be in Farnborough, which is an hour or so from London, on the 19th to the 23rd of March next year. So looking forward to seeing you there. Right, that's enough about that. I wrote a book with Chrissy and Jess and Claudio about DBA tools. My advice, don't ever write a book, because it's terribly hard work. So let's think about the journey of SQL CMD. What came before? So before SQL CMD, there was iSQL and OSQL. So we know that iSQL stands for Interactive SQL, and we think that OSQL stands for old SQL, because nobody can actually really remember. I think it probably was something connectivity, but we can't remember. And this is what old people like Grant Fritchie, like Gianluca Sartori. This is what they used when they first started connecting to SQL instances, SQL databases, and they were basically able to query them. They're very good at querying at the command line. That was about your lot. You weren't able to pass in files. You weren't able to use parameters. So life changed. So 17 years ago, Microsoft released SQL 2005. And with CU 3 or 4, you were able to use SQL CMD, which used ODBC for its connectivity. And we used that for years. I mean, I used it for ages. It was always a tool that I needed to have. It was a tool I made sure my junior DBAs had, because it meant that no matter what happened, you should be able to connect with a DAC connection, a dedicated admin connection, and be able to connect to an instance and find out what was going wrong. And it meant that you needed to know some T-SQL to be able to get some information and find out what was happening. So I think people just stopped using it for a while. It just kind of sort of faded away, and the old timers carried on using it, and nobody really used it, because as we came into the new world, we had Apple stuff, we had ARM powered stuff, we had Kubernetes and containers and things, and the old SQL CMD just did not work with, didn't work at all. So what Microsoft did is they said, click, thank you. We're going to make use of a new tool, and they used open source. They forked it from a repo called Go MSSQLDB, and they made SQL CMD, or Go SQL CMD. You'll hear it called as well, and it is the new shiny written in Go, because with Go you can just run a build, and it'll just build a single executable that'll work on any platform. Well, you can build a single executable for any platform, and you just have that one thing. You're not worrying about a whole lot of other stuff. It works cross-platform. It works cross-architecture. So it worked with ARM CPUs as well as Intel CPUs. So the question then is, does it work with the old stuff? And I use the new stuff here to give me a great picture. So this is Midjourney AI tooling, and I asked it to give me a picture of Lemmy dressed as Beethoven playing the violin. And this was literally the first picture that it gave me. That I enhanced it to make it look prettier and fit the space better. But this was the first picture it gave me, and I think it's pretty cool. Is it backward compatible? SQL CMD is absolutely, completely backward compatible. So all of the old scripts that you've got will absolutely work. All of your old tooling and your ways of working will absolutely still carry on to work, apart from the things that don't. So some of the things that don't are -R, because Go doesn't understand what regional settings are. -I, you have to use set quoted identifier off instead. We no longer use the / as a flag. We now use dash. And some of these flags in the bottom left, the DNS name and echo input, these are not currently available. But Microsoft have made SQL CMD open source, which means that you can go in and say, hey, I would like this, and request it. And if enough people want it, they will then build it. But also you could actually, if you know some Go, you could actually write it yourself and submit it as a PR. So that is always available for you. So installation is the most important part of anything. So you use a package manager. So get install SQL CMD, or you can use Choco install CMD. We can use brew install SQL CMD. So all these things work the same way. Or on Linux, you've got apt-get or yum, and you just use an install. So Very simple, very quick. And does it work with containers? That was the other thing that old SQL CMD doesn't do. Now, absolutely, it works with containers in that the SQL running in a container is just SQL. So we can always connect to it and query it. But this new SQL CMD has a whole bundle of brand new, exciting stuff that will enable you to work with containers much easier. So it's showtime. Let's have a look at some demos. If you have any questions, just ask. Don't be shy, just ask. We will learn whatever we need to. Okay, so
if you are shy and don't want to shout out, just type in the chat and I will shout for you. But just unmute as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's totally cool. So we'll do the first sort of, is that big enough question? I think it probably is, but if anybody wants it bigger or smaller, let me know. Good. Right here. So we've got some things here. If you would like to find these scripts, you will find them on my GitHub repository. I won't be uploading them straight after this because I'm on my mobile phone, but I will ensure that they get put into my presentations repo quickly. So how can we tell that we're on SQL CMD? If we just do a -- version, you can see that already we're on version 1.3. And we get this new information. It's one of the things I love about this SQL CMD is that unlike the old help, you really get some excellent descriptions in your help and help along the way, not just by typing -- help, but actually when you start using commands as well. So you see that this -- help gives us this new, what I call a new CLI format of the help, much more of a man page that's giving us all this information. You see, we've got everything can. But quite often people will say things like, well, that's great, but can I run an old version of SQL CMD? Well, yeah, absolutely. If there's any reason why, if there's any reason why you need to use the old SQL CMD, we can just jump into that location and we'll do that. And there we can see we're on the old SQL Server command line tool. I mean, old, it's not that old really, but you can see we can just go through and work with that absolutely fine. But the new version will also work with the -- as we're getting the help. But you'll notice that it gives you the old style help for that. So even if you forget, you'll still be able to get in. And when we get right up to the top here, you'll see that actually what we've got is version 1.3.0. But I would always say, don't use that. Use -- help, and you're going to get all the information. So I'm going to start bang off with the absolutely greatest and brilliantest, because I can't be bothered to make use of one of my existing SQL instances that I've got here because I'm at home today, but I was elsewhere. Let's build a SQL instance so that we can show that SQL CMD can connect to it. And the way we do this is we're going to make use of Docker and containers, and we're going to build a volume, and we're going to have a network bridge, and we're going to, you don't need to know any of that stuff. If you want to know how to do that, go and read Andrew Puskey's blog post, start working with containers or building it out in Kubernetes, and that's all brilliant. But actually, with this SQL CMD, all we need is this create SQL command. And one of the great things about it is you can say, what is on 2019 CU11. Okay, well, let's go and have a look. I wouldn't be on CU11, but CU9, let's say. Oh, no, we can do 11, thank you. So we do 2019 CU11. Well, we can go and find that exact version of our SQL instance, and then we can install a container that has exactly that. So these are all the versions that we've got. Really, really useful. But for now, I'm just going to use the default one, which is the latest version. And I'm going to accept the EULA because we need to say that we accept all the licensing terms for using SQL. And I'm going to use this -- cached. And that means that instead of downloading a new image, it's just going to use the one that's on my machine. Now, I do that anyway, but the fact that I'm on my mobile phone makes that even better. And what this is going to do is going to create us a SQL container. It's going to have SQL 2022 in it, and it's going to create me a SA account and rotate the password and then disable it and then create me a user account. And then it says, here we go, look, I'm ready for client connections on port 1433. Why it has to be 1433, I don't know. I think that's a Go thing, but it does annoy me. And it even gives you some information about what you can do next. So this is where I'm saying that the new help is so much more than just what can I read from -- help from a man page. I can actually go in and see exactly what we've got. But I'm going to talk first about this scenario here where we're troubleshooting a problem with an instance. And we've decided to install SQL of that exact version and work with it there. To do that, we're going to use a thing called a context. So like if you use Kubernetes, you've got a kubectl context that enables you to switch between different clusters. This is the same thing. It enables you to switch between different connections. So at the moment, we've got this context and it's called it MS SQL. That's the default name. And if we use this sqlcmd config view, you can see if you're used to looking at a Kubernetes cluster config, this is the same sort of thing. Tells us what version we're on, tells us where we're connecting. So this is our address and our port. This is the name of our endpoint. If we're using a container, so it's going to tell us what image we're using and even the ID of the container that's running in Docker. And it's going to have a context. And the context is going to be called MS SQL, and it's going to have a user of Mr. Rob at MS SQL. So that Mr. Rob is the account that I sign into my machine with, and then at the name of my endpoint. And it tells that this is our current context. And then it has a username, and it says, here is my username. It's authenticated. It's a basic authentication. Mr. Rob, what's the password? Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't actually know what the password is because it's just been magically created for us. So luckily, if you do this config view -- raw, there we are. There is our password. So up here, it just said password redacted. Here it says we've got our password, and it is actually not encrypted. But you will talk about encryption later on. Now, if we want to be able to connect to something, we might need our connection strings. So if we were building up some sort of test harness where we were using a SQL instance and we needed the connection strings to be able to go and connect to a container or an app server or something that was running something else, then we would need these. Here are the different ways we've got for our connection strings. So ODBC, JDBC, Go, sqlcmd, and ado.net. I never know how to say that. So I'm going to do a bit of PowerShell because, I love PowerShell. I'll just create myself a little credential. And just to prove that we can do all of that old school, remember we were on 1433, so I can just do a sqlcmd u. I don't even need to do a USA. I can just do a u, Mr. Rob, and a p for my password, and then a query. Let's select from sys.databases. Oh, brilliant. Good work, Rob. Why did you do what we wanted? Let's see what we've got there. Ah, interesting. Okay, let's do it the old school fashioned way, and we will take this password. I'll take it from there where I can get between my thing. And I'm going to set that to be that here, like this. There we go. So my regex didn't work as I thought it should have done. We are now just able to connect straight through old sqlcmd fashion. It has worked absolutely perfectly. But actually, we don't need to do all of that because the whole point of this context is that it's all embedded inside. So I could just do a sqlcmd, a -- query, and select my name, and there we've got it. Bingo. Let's reset our credential. Just to prove nothing up my sleeves, it all just kind of works with DBA tools as well. Nice and quickly, we're just straight in with DBA tools. We would have had to set our trust certificate. If you got an error when you follow this code, you might have to set the trust certificate. That's the new way that Microsoft has set for making sure that we are connecting securely to our instances. So let's create ourselves a database. And then let's show something else that's pretty magical here. So we just run a query, I created a database called dbjunk, and now I'm going to open in ADS. So I've just done sqlcmd, open ADS. It's now going to connect to my instance for this context, and it's going to give me open a query. You're going to open a query window? Yes, we know that. No, okay. Let's just do it this way. Instead of doing that, let's have a look at Azure Data Studio going to Lally. Okay. We'll look at our databases. Here is our dbjunk, just to show we've been able to connect to that. So we'll close this. Oh dear. And whilst that's going on, what I've done is I have just, so you know, there we go. I have just checked that I've got a Data Studio process going because it was decided to run in insiders, and I've just stopped the process so that we don't have to sit and wait for that at a later date. But we still have our container running. Let's create a new container. I'm going to create a container called Scotland, because when you go to Scotland, they really like to tell you that they're from Scotland. And if we have a look at this container, you can see that we've got a database already created called Scotland. And that's because we added to our normal MS SQL, create MS SQL command, -- user database, and Scotland. So to make sure that we query just that database, we can use the -- database parameter. And then you can see that we are connected to our database. And now, perhaps as part of some sort of build process, we're going to run an input file to do this. So now imagine that maybe you've got a development team or something. You could give them a sqlcmd command that says sqlcmd create MS SQL using this particular version, add in a database, run an input file, or maybe you could use a backpack deploy or something, and then get all the tables you want. So we'll do this. We'll put in our kill switch engage, it's a metal band file, and then we'll go and have a look at our Scotland database, and we'll see that we've got a table holding data with a bad name, with spaces in the name, because I am an evil DBA. I am such an evil DBA that I used to deploy all production databases and test ones, to be fair, with a additional calculated column on them that was 1 divided by 0. So that when all the developers came to me and said, oh, this command isn't working and it's giving me an error, and I said, well, stop using select star then, please. Please only give me the columns that you need, not all of the columns. Stop being lazy. Anyway, because I'm such an evil person, I don't like to use the correct naming conventions for things. And I can now run this command to get me the data from information schema about the columns in this database. And you can see it's done that sort of fudged formatting where everything's gone a bit screwy and it's not quite so easy to understand. And actually, they've fixed that. So if you add in this -- format equals vert, you get a vertical result set. That's perfectly good for 1 row, 2 rows, 5 rows. If you're going to do 10,000 rows or select top 1,000, it's not going to work so well. If you have a really wide number of columns, it's not going to work so well. But Magnus and I were talking before the show, and this was one of our favorite things about this. So just gives a nice, easy way for you to see that this column name is ID underscore identity identifier, it's a number, and it's got a data type of int. And then we've got a column that's a load of big blobby data underscore var binary, and that is a var binary. So we can have a bit of fun with this. But also, if you now go into an interactive session, I just type sqlcmd and it uses my context, so my username and my password or whatever we've got here. And now I can copy this and we'll paste it in here. Let's not paste that. Let's paste. Nope. Let's try that again. We'll copy that and we'll paste the colon list color. So the colon is like a magic command, and it gives us a chance to have all of these different colors that we could use. So I'm going to choose Emacs this time, and then let's do an Emacs there, and I can use this set var magic command and set the sqlcmd color scheme to Emacs. And now, if I run this command, instead of coming out in black and white, now I'm getting coming out in color. Now that's cool. It's lovely. People might think that it's just a bit of fun, but then actually start to think about the people who have color blindness and how this could actually help people to be able to work in an environment that is easier for them to be able to read and understand what the data is. So it's a really, really cool tool. Now, remember, Rob, to type exit here, otherwise things don't work. So if you remember, we started off with solving our problem. We were using our DB junk database that we'd created. We were doing our work in that one. And then we had to respond to something, and we were then created our instance. We ran our input file. We created the Scotland database. Now got two instances of SQL running under here in our context. And if we do a Control R and look for config, we will find our config view. And if we have a look in that, you can see that now, whereas we did just have one endpoint, we've now got a second endpoint. And we did just have one context, we've now got two context. And they're helpfully named by the automation as MS-SQL2 and MS-SQL1. And you can imagine it'll go 3, 4, 10, 20, 73. I've not done 73, but I've certainly had it up to 20. We can just then switch our context. So now I've switched over to the DB junk database, and you can see I'm back in there. If I then put this and I switched into the MS-SQL2, then now I'm in Scotland. So that's really cool. It's a really useful way of being able to switch between our contexts. Yes, I know the automatic naming is a pain. You're going to have to remember. We'll talk about that in a minute. So it's really simple to create our containers. Now we just need to delete them. So if we do delete, here's another thing I love about this sqlcmd, is that it actually asks you the question. It doesn't just go, oh, right, I'll just delete it. It says, look, we're in this current context. Do you want to continue? I'm like, yes, please. I definitely want to continue. And it goes, no. I'm verifying that there are no non-system databases on this container. If there'd been none, it would have deleted it. But because we've added a database file, and it knows that inside this container, we have no backup of this database at all. As it goes, well, right, I am not going to take responsibility for this. You have to take responsibility for this. And so, yes, please. I will then say sqlcmd delete port, yes. And what it's done is it's now deleted that instance. And now you can see at the bottom, it's just popped us back into our original context. So we'll get rid of that one as well. And now it says operation completed successfully. And if I was to run it again, it'll say, well, wait a minute, look, we don't have any context, so I can't delete one. Doesn't throw you a great big error, just tells you what's going on. So how about if, let's run this, because it might take a little bit longer than normal. How about if we want to create a container from a backup? Because that would be really useful, wouldn't it? So we can use the create MS SQL. We're going to accept our EULA. We're going to use cached, and we're going to use this dash using parameter. And that then allows us to pass in a backup file that's on an HTTP or an HTTPS endpoint and named .back. So you've all got those, yeah? You store all your production databases on an HTTPS endpoint with a .back, yeah? Absolutely. Of course you do. It's brilliant. It's brilliant for demos because look, we've just restored AdventureWorks. That's super, super good for that. Real world, yeah, okay, maybe not so brilliant. But let's get rid of that. We live in a modern world. Yeah. In this world we live in the data platform world, quite likely we're going to have backups that we can store in Azure Storage. Whether we can store them there or whether we do store them there, yeah, we can. So now I can then add in this. I'm going to create MS SQL. I'm going to accept my EULA. I'm going to use cached, so I'm not downloading a new image. And I use this using command. And this time I'm going to pass in a SAS URL to the file. Okay, so we're absolutely going to a file. And I'm going to add in, we've got this verbosity. So normal verbosity is, I think, 2. 3 is even more. 4 is even more. 5 is all of the verbosity. So we'll start running that just so we can see what's going on. Because it gives you an idea of what's happening within this container as we run. Here we go. We can see we're creating a container. We're running the upgrades for our system databases. What else have we got here? We're creating a user. There we are. We're running a create login. We're now altering our SA and disabling it. So you can see that all of this is going. And now we're running a command inside the container. We're making a backup directory. And we are then going to use wget to go and get our database backup. So you don't have to worry about this. Normally, you won't even see this. But we're showing you this so that you can actually understand what's happening. And it's obviously taking a little bit longer today. There we go. That's all right then. Also, to show you this fact, is that this is downloading the file. So understand what it is doing. It is going to this Azure storage, and it is grabbing that back up, and it's downloading it inside your container. And then it is then going to restore it from inside the container. So this is a tiny backup. I mean, we're running on the mobile and we're streaming and all the rest of it. But if it is a big backup, you're going to need to have that space on your host, on your laptop, on your wherever you're running your SQL CMD. You have to have twice as much space. In fact, maybe even more if you've got compressed backups, which if they're big, they probably should be. So you're going to have to download, you have the size for the backup file, and then you have to have the expanded size for your MDF and your LDFs to go into. But once it's done the backup and it's then saved it, what it then does is it builds a SQL statement. So then it goes and grabs the files from the backup thing, and then it does a restore file list only, and then it works out what the SQL it should run is. It's neat, isn't it? Here's some stuff that you can go and make use of if you needed to do this yourself. I mean, if you needed to do this yourself, you've probably written stuff very close to this already, but you can go and do it. And then we can see we are now restoring some online data DB backup and our file, and then we're upgrading it to our version 2022. And then we're running our alter login, and we're setting the default database to this some online DB backup. And now we're ready. So if we have a look, there we go. We've got our database from our backup held in storage. This is so neat. Being able to get all of this done just in a single line of code. Because remember, that's all we wrote. I know I've spent 3 or 4 minutes talking about what it's actually doing. We just ran that one line of code, and it restored a database from an Azure storage backup and put it into our instance and made it our default database. It's absolutely wonderful. And
can I ask something in in that URL? You have the I mean, the authentication, do you have the keys on the URL there, right?
Right. So this is so you're asking what is this URL? So let's grab a page. Let's try that one. Why not? We'll go to portal. No, we'll just go to portal. And no, we don't want to save that. Thank you very much. We don't want to be in the Beard Arc resource group either. We would like to be in the SQL Backs storage account container. So what I said is you need the SAS URL. So if we go to our containers and we go to our, I can't remember which one it's in. It might be in that one. There we go. There's our some online DB backup.
Yep.
And then what I did was I then generated this SAS. And from that SAS, I then needed a token and URL. So I had to start an expiry, grab the token URL, and this URL here is what is being passed in.
But couldn't SQL use that as restore from URL? So
yes.
So not have to download the file first and then do the restore.
Yes, that's ASCII. Yes, it could. But that's not the way that they do it.
Okay. Cool.
I assume it's because of because you're doing it inside the container.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the host that's outside that would have to be going and connecting to Azure. So I don't know if that's something to do with it. DNS perhaps. I don't know. Mm-hmm. All of those things should work normally, but that is the way they do it.
Yep.
Where did we get to? We got to here. Yes, we know that doesn't exist. This should be that if we do a select name from sys databases and shout it as well. There we go. Here is our some online DB backup. So we're just able to go straight into here, delete that connection. One of the beauties about this SQL CMD thing is you can open up straight into Azure Data Studio. One of the most annoying things about it is that if you're doing demos and you keep doing this same presentation, it caches the connection. And then when I do the open ADS, it doesn't work. So there we go. So let's remove that. And of course, you're going to say, what about Azure, Rob? What about Azure, Rob? Well, if you looked in the help, you'll see that you've got this authentication method. And in this authentication method, you've got all of these different choices of ways of connecting to Azure. So we've got Active Directory Managed Identity or Service Principal. I haven't used Managed Identity. I have used Service Principal. I haven't used Active Directory Interactive. I have used that one and that one and that one and SQL password you've seen because that's the default. So we make sure that we're logged in. We should still be logged in. Yep. And then we can just do a SQL CMD -s, pass in the name of Azure SQL Server, pass in the name of a database, change this authentication method to Active Directory Integrated. We'll put in the format of as well. And oh, good. It's still alive. Normally I do this, and this is a serverless instance, and it's gone back to sleep again since I checked, and it worked. So then we can just run a query, and you can see that just before Christmas last year, I went looking for Santa, but I didn't see him when I was out riding. But just to show that you can connect to an Azure database and get the thing, you could do the set var as well if you want. Now, here's the cunning thing. That actually, that's been there all along. That's been there for a while in SQL CMD. And all you needed was this magical -G. So as long as you had used your session and you had logged into AZ CLI, so you'd done an AZ login and then set the right subscription, then you could just use this -G. And sure enough, we're in the same place. We're still in our database. So that was completely still there. So that's kind of neat. kind of like that. That's a cool thing to have. We must remember to press exit in to type exit in here, because otherwise we don't. We try and run the next command in there and it doesn't work very well, which is fun. But let's do Control R and we'll do a delete force yes. There we go. We've got rid of that context. So that was one way that we talked about creating an instance, creating a database, getting everything together, is we could create our instance. We could then run an input file to create a schema or some data or whatever. We could restore a backup either from an HTTPS endpoint or from Azure storage. But what about if we got our own container? What about if we had something like DBHX and we had a container which we used to do all of our testing for, that we've already got our databases on? How about if we wanted to use that within our SQL CMD? Use a SQL CMD create MS SQL. This time I'm going to give it a name so that we know what it is. This is DBHX. And I'm going to have this name. This is what the container, the SQL instance believes that it is on. And we're going to accept our EULA. Will be cached so that we don't download the new download a new image every time. And now we're going to have a context name. So you remember I said it would automatically create MS SQL 1, MS SQL 2, MS SQL 20. We want to know what it is. We're going to give it a name. So we're going to call it DBHX1. The registry is where do I have this stuff in DBHX. The repo, the repository, is the image that we want. This is my SQL instance 1 image. That's what I call it for DBHX. I'm going to pick a particular tag because this is the version that we want to be looking at. And we'll do a verbosity of 4 this time. So we're going to see what we're going to get. And you can see that it's going to go grab that context. We can then watch our error log go through just to make sure that I've got my databases up and running, because then I can do a Control C. Now, the problem here is that I have a custom user inside there. We've got a SQL admin user that we can always use to make sure that we control what is happening for our automation. But SQL CMD doesn't know anything about this. So how can we get past that? We look at our config, we've got this Mr. Rob that it's created helpfully for us. But of course, in my instance, I don't know anything about Mr. Rob. I've not created anything about Mr. Rob. That's no good. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new config user. Passwords in a file, unless these are passwords that everybody knows, because everybody knows that our SQL admin password for DBA tools and DBHX containers is dbatools.io. So I don't mind that you know that. In general, don't do this, but you can then set your environmental variable for your SQL CMD password. And then we're going to add a user with the config add user. We'll give it a name. We'll give it the username because, of course, the username must match the name. You normally should match the password, but there we go. And then we're going to add this password encryption. So this password encryption DP API means that it is secure for this user that is running this session on this machine that we're in. That means that probably nobody on this call can get the password. I mean, to be fair, you can see the password, but I'm telling you that it is secure and it's encrypted, but it's not perfect. Undoubtedly, there are people in this world who will be able to go and get that, but it's as good as we could get. We look at our config, you can see that we've got our SQL admin, tells us that it's password encrypted with DP API. We can now add this. If you remember, we could add this --raw and you can see the password. So if I'm logged in as this user, I can go and grab the password. But if I'm not, and I've got this file, because this is saved as a file, it's not going to help you very much. So let's add the user we created to a new context. So we've got our endpoint DBHX1. That was the name that we gave to our container when we created it. We've got our user SQL admin that we've just created, and we're going to create a new context and call it DBHX SQL admin so that we know which one it is. And we can add that. Now, this is cool But don't forget, just because we're using SQL CMD to create containers doesn't mean that those are the only instances that we connect to. It might be that I might add a context for my Strava database and call it Strava and pass in the Beard SQL server address there and the database and give it a name and create my context that way and leave it stored in my config. So I can just, anytime I want to, I can have SQL CMD and I can just go and run a query. So we have our SQL admin. Now I'm going to switch context. Now I said switch context because I'm used to working with Kubernetes. And in Kubernetes, you would switch your context. Here, you use your context. So we'll say SQL CMD config, use context, and we'll switch into, I'm going to say switch every time. We switch into dbhx-SQL admin. And now if you have a look, you can see that dbhx tests itself very thoroughly on the most modern and up-to-date databases and the most well used as well. And even now, we're now using a different user that we've created. We've gone into Open ADS. We're actually still going to be able to connect straight in. Here is our enable trust certificate, and it's going to come in there. And where are you going to come up? You're going to come up. There we go. Just to prove it, there is our Northwind and our pubs. So we will delete that so that future demos don't bite Rob. And then we can clean up. Oops, let's Control C that first, and then we'll clean up. And this is, you want to get rid of this context? Yes, please. I do. I'll does this verifying. Oh, that's good. So we do have our, that still works. We'll get rid of our context. And it gets a little bit funny here because we've added another user in. And what we'll end up with in a minute is our context. If we try and delete that, it'll say, oh, I can't delete it because I've got no endpoints to uninstall. So there's an issue open for that. Remember, I said Microsoft have issues open. And what we have to do is we have to add a duff endpoint on, and then we can delete our user, and then we can delete our context. Oh, no, when we can't delete our context anymore. Do delete. There we go. And then our delete works successfully. That's really neat, really cool. That is all the stuff that is available to you right now. And if we find this, you'll see that we had github.com/Microsoft/Go SQL CMD. Here is the, thank you very much, Edge, for being so wonderful. Here is the repo that Microsoft have. This is their open source repo for this. And that means that you can see exactly what is coming up. If you were to go and look in the releases, you'll see the latest release, not even on the latest release. You can see the activity. You can see what's coming from the discussions. And you can see the issues that are available. And you can see the pull requests. And sometimes you can see pull requests that are from people who work for Microsoft. And they'll show you some of the new stuff that's coming up and coming. And that means that if you are the sort of big bearded or not big bearded nerd who likes to play around with these things, you can actually build the package because it's Go. So we can download the repository, we can check out that pull request, we can build it in Go, and we can create ourselves a SQL CMD. And that means that we could go and have a look at some other cool stuff, except that we're on this machine. So let's do, no, let's not do that. Let me find the right path. You can tell this morning was joyful, and I was able to completely prepare as expected. Make sure that everything is as we expected. There we go. So we're going to accept our EULA. So this is one way that we can just not have to keep putting in -- accept EULA. And if we now have a look at this, you can see that it thinks that we're on version, oh, we don't even know what version we're on. But we're now running inside with this new exe that's been created. And some of the things that you've got that you can do here is you could actually create a container. So we're just going to create a container, create MS SQL cached. And then once you've done that, you can then use this use command and restore into it. Now, I think the name of that will probably change, but you can see that this functionality, which isn't available at the moment, is something that they've realized they can do. So if you've already got an instance running in a container and you wanted to create a new one, then it allows you just to use a different backup file. That's kind of cool. Being able to restore from a backup that's not on an HTTP or HTTPS endpoint and is not in an Azure storage account, but actually is on this machine. So let's just make sure that we have got this backup. Aha. We do not have that backup. Where have we put that backup? On this machine. On this machine. Oh, let's pick this one. Why not? Let's pick this, and we will pick that name. Here is this name. Probably just type that quicker than I can copy it, but there we go. Let's do that. So we've got our SQL instance running, and this time I'm going to restore from something that's on my own machine. So there we are. We just found a backup. Right, I want to restore that backup, and it has magically restored it back on. So that's super cool. I am going to need this again in a minute. But actually, sometimes what you want to do is you want to be able to restore your database and give it a different name. So maybe you're restoring your prod database and you want to attach it to your test harness, and your test harness has got expecting a database of a different name. It's very wise to do that, because otherwise you can, in fact, drop your production database and take a national system offline for 9 hours. Ask me how I know that. Don't ask me how I know that. But anyway, we can restore a backup with a different name. There we are. This is going to restore as that database name. There we go. So if we remove it, and it's like, oh, well, actually, you know what? Let's just do it all in one line. So remember, this is stuff that's coming. This isn't available yet, but you can kind of see that if you put the correct values in, this time we just want to create a container, and instead of then adding the backup on afterwards, I just want to go straight from my own backup. There we go. And this time we've got our AdventureWorks back in again. And, you know, just to be sure, if you want to, oh no, that's not going to work, is it? We haven't got.
Tracy has got to the voice. Don't worry.
Thank you so much, Alexa. Now we're just going to. Sorry about that. That was one of my fish that decided to nearly jump out of the pond. Luckily, bounced itself back in. Silly animal. I was nearly playing fish rescue. So we've restored our database, and this time we've restored it all in one line, and it's now called yet another database name, just because I can. And in fact, even better, this time I'm going to restore the database. Oh, I'm not going to do it from that file, am I? Because it doesn't exist. But at least it tells me it's going to do that.
Leaving the voice. Kettle on in front.
It's going to restore the database, give it a new name, and this time it's going to open ADS. And when we open ADS, enable our trust certificate, and so, select name from CS databases, if I can type. There we go. And now this time you've got an even longer database name to see if anyone is reading this. Nobody was reading it. Ah, dear. Oh, well. So we won't save that, and we will delete the connection so that future Rob's demos work. But it's kind of cool. Now, sometimes I don't have an MDF on this machine that I can lay my hands on very quickly. But it appears that sometimes when people want to start databases, transfer databases around, they use an MDF file. Now, I don't know why you would do that, but this is what you can do. And this new code will allow you to take an MDF file. Don't even need to tell it anything different. Just use this using command. Pass it in the path to an MDF file, and it will create you a database. And I think that's it. There you are. So that's all new stuff. So that was a wild, rapid run through SQL instances. I wonder if we did a Control F and a create MS SQL, there are 12. So we've just installed and deleted SQL 12 times and then done various databases on it in the space of, what, about 40 minutes of demos. I hope that was of use to you. If you need to get in touch with me, my name is Rob. I'm known as SQL DBA with a beard. I'm sure you'll be able to find me when you're doing that. Does anybody have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat. There is automation, the ultimate lazy man's dream come true. But I wouldn't say automation means you're lazy. It just means you like spending 4 hours to automate a 5-minute task.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is that's Q as well. Hi Q. I used to work with Q. It's a very useful tool to have, to be able to automate things. That means that as soon as anybody wants to do something more, they're going to want to do it 73 times. If you can make that happen in 5 minutes, then you will go far. And
I mean, use cases I just see in my head here for, I mean, this whole create the context, create the database and do stuff with it and restore a backup or deploy a DAC back to it. It's a lot has to do with testing, where I think databases are a bit overlooked when it comes to unit testing. Yeah. So at least, I mean, if you run a build agent in Azure DevOps Services, you can spin up the container in the build agent and you can deploy your database and you can run all your T-SQL T tests or whatever tests you have. And then if it doesn't break, then you just delete the context and you have a test report. Yeah. You have the artifact. And if the test break, you just throw the artifact away as well, because then you don't want to release that build. And it's we have been able to do it, but we had to write up the automation for it ourselves and create the container and maybe create the a lot of stuff that is for free now in the tool. So cool stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really neat, really cool. Okay.
Thanks for coming.
No, thank you for having me.
And we survived your non-fiber connection.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. Actually, it's done well. I'm really pleased because this is the first time in this office that I've been without internet, and this is the first time in 3 or 4 years working from home that I will be able to just carry on from home without, there was a bit of faffing, but without really any trouble. Yeah. So can we get some pointers for somebody to get them started with SQL CMD? Okay, so one way of doing that would be to give them access to that GitHub repository with the demo code in there. And then they whoever they might be, would be able to follow along with those instructions. And it starts from the very top where it starts with an installation, and then it will take you through being able to do anything. Of course, You're going to find a different place for your backup to live. That's going to be a different place. But other than that, you'd be able to run with that. And then as soon as you've got a handle on that, you can then start to make use of that to do anything. That's the whole point of my presentations, my code, putting it out there, is that you can actually pick it up and make use of it. And apart from the few local things, it should just work for you.